Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. It is Monday, May 9th, 2022. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Tonight's broadcast, I've been looking forward to this all week, is we're calling it the masculine and the feminine energy in all of us. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why this topic. But something I thought I'd start off with tonight, even before we get into that, was some reflections on the week. I came across this quote that I love so much. I'm sharing it as often as I can with everybody that I can because I think it invites our embracing of paradox, of dialectics, of things that seem like they're the opposite, but they can be held at the same time. I came across it on social media by somebody named by the name of Amber Dalson, I believe is how you would pronounce that. And she said this. She said, "Secure attachment is the delicate tangle of feeling safe, interconnected, independent, and free." And the reason I loved it is because it is this balance, this delicate tangle of things that seem like that the opposite. And you can almost feel from this quote the idea of what it means to be in that kind of relationship. If you can imagine it from the child's side, from the child's perspective, it's that place where you know it's safe to go home, but you also know it's safe not to go home. Think about a child, an adult child during the holidays, or think about a friend that you might have that it's great to call them and it's okay not to call them. Being in the same room with somebody where you can talk about anything and you can also stay silent. Being with somebody who can embrace and celebrate your uniqueness and at the same time not require you to believe and think and feel the way that they feel. They can embrace your uniqueness also. So that was something that I thought as I talk about attachment, as we talk about attachment-based therapy, because that's really the foundational approach. A lot of times when I'm teaching our therapists, either in our wilderness therapy program or in our intensive program, and people use various models, various approaches, various techniques in their therapy. One of the things that I constantly remind them is this idea of secure attachment, of attachment-based therapy, is beneath it all. You can imagine this with a parent. There might be parents with different talents and different gifts and different approaches to the way that they do their life. Somebody loves to travel. Somebody loves to do crafting. Somebody loves to read. Somebody loves It doesn't matter. But underneath all of that is this secure connection, this attachment, and it leaves the child feeling safe. I remember years ago when I was at a family gathering, there was a small baby in the room that was quiet the entire time. And I can remember people commenting on how good the baby was. And I remember thinking, obviously, there might not be any harm in this, saying something like that at this stage of the baby's life. It can't interpret any dialogue, of course, but I could feel the pressure for that baby to have no needs. That if it was to be and remain good, quote unquote, it was to not cry. It was to not require resources and energy from the adults around it. So there's so many. I read something just yesterday. In fact, I might be able to find it if I look it up quickly enough. I read something yesterday that talked about this kind of paradox that I'm talking about. Yeah, here it is. It said this. It said heroism in our time could be redefined as the ability to stand paradox. And I love that idea. That's by Robert Johnson. I love that idea that to be heroic, and it really is true when you think about it in the context of the journey of the heroic parent, is the ability to stand and tolerate paradox. And I thought that was really a great thing. I'm going to call this first part of it Reedy's reflections, because these are some ideas that are leading up to the topic that I've thought about this week. Here's a second reflection that I had for the week. In fact, I have two different quotes version of this idea that I wanted to share with you as we start out tonight's broadcast. I was thinking about this the other day in the context of my work relationships, my personal relationships inside of my family, my friendships, and I was also thinking about it with clients and myself. And this is the thought that came to me. I wrote, for therapy to be most effective, the client must allow for the existence of the unconscious and its impact on life. And I was thinking about it, it's not just the therapy client. So I went on further to say, and I ended up this is the one that I ended up sharing publicly. In order to grow and expand, one must first allow for the existence of the unconscious and its impact on life. What that quote means is when we're going to therapy, or when we're in a difficult conversation or dynamic with somebody in our personal or professional life, we first must allow for the possibility to be most able to grow, to be most prepared to grow, to be most set up to grow. We have to at least allow for the existence that there might be something that we're not aware of that's driving our behaviors. That's all. That's all that's asked. Is that there might be something that we don't see and that we're not aware of, some fear, some anger, some sadness lurking just beneath the surface that is driving our behaviors, that's impacting our life. And if we just allow for the possibility of that, as kind of what I'm saying is a minimum requirement to have the ability to grow, then we can get out of the everyday conversations that we're having. You know, those fights that you have with each other, you have with your co-parent, with the people in your family, with the people in your life. You know, those fights that are the same fights over and over again. And part of the reason why you're having the same fight is because you're not arguing or discussing what's really going on. One or both parties aren't open to the idea that there's something deeper than who's taking out the kitchen garbage at night when it gets full, or who fills up the gas in the car when they take it out. And of course, the mundane examples are endless. So that was some reflections I had for this week, and I thought it might be helpful for people that are listening to this to hear those. So the masculine and the feminine energy in all of us. Why this topic? Why does this topic interest me? Let me share this quote as a starting point from Alan Watts. I again, this was another quote that really hit me this week. Alan Watts, a teacher of Eastern religion and Buddhism, once said, "When you find out that there was never anything in the dark side to be afraid of," the dark side refers to an illusion that he's talking about, our shadow element, the unconscious part of us, the part of us that we have learned to repress and keep hidden because it was found to be unacceptable by those around us, by our family, by the culture that we grew up in. So he says, when you find out that there was never anything in the dark side to be afraid of, nothing is left but to love. And that goes back to what I've been talking about, what I talk about, which is the idea of learning to love the horrible, rotten self, learning to love all the parts of you, even the parts of you that are getting you in trouble, even the acting out, the misbehaving parts of you, the symptomatic parts. When you can learn to love and understand deeply how those parts were created, where they came from, you are then capable of loving other people, of loving all of the other people. When I say all of the other people, I don't mean everybody. I mean the people around you that you love, you're able to love all of them, all of who they are, because you've made peace with yourself. Therefore, when somebody acts out on you, you're less likely to be triggered to anger or rage or hatred, because you can see what they might be going through, how they might be scared, how they might be hurt. I remember some years ago, and I've told the story to illustrate different lessons before, but I remember when somebody in my professional life tried to do something to hurt me, something very intentional. And a friend and we were discussing it later on, a mutual friend of ours, and my friend was saying, I just haven't forgiven that person. They weren't even the target of the malicious behavior. I was the target of it. And I said, I don't hold it against them. I forgive them. I definitely have boundaries with them. I don't have them in my life every day. I don't find them to be a safe person. So again, you're starting to hear the paradox of things. But I said, but I learned that everything that they did was inside of me. And at some point, I had to either give up my own life, kill myself, just lay down and quit, or go forward and find a way to love myself. And when I was able to develop love for the parts of myself, the dark parts of myself, as Alan Watts said, then I was able to love this person. In fact, I didn't even have a moment where I didn't love them because I knew they were scared. I knew they felt threatened and backed into a corner, and that was their only way of dealing with things. So tonight, I want to talk about masculine and feminine in very practical ways. I'll make some allusions to where it comes from, the ideas of it, what it's not, but that the goal of tonight is to understand that there are masculine and feminine traits in all of us, regardless of our gender. That if we could more fully embrace and find balance with, we could be happier, more free, more connected to the people we love, less confused about what to do in our relationships. Margaret Mead said this. First of all, talking a little bit about the separation between when I'm talking about the masculine and the feminine energy and gender and sex. Margaret Mead said, "We say that many, if not all, of the personality traits which we have called masculine or feminine are as lightly linked to sex as are the clothing, the manners, and the form of headdress that a society at a given period has assigned to either sex." So when I say masculine or feminine, in this context this evening, it has nothing to do with sex, right? The physiology of our sex chromosomes, our DNA, it has nothing to do with that, nor does it have something to do with gender. Well, it does have something to do with gender, but it doesn't necessarily define gender absolutely. Gender being the way that we experience ourselves in a social context, the various ways that we experience ourselves. In fact, I called my son, who's in college, who's an expert on sex and gender, to ask him to provide me the simplest definition. And he said, sex is a biological phenomenon determined. This is just what he said off the top of his head. He was our human Google when he was at home. Sex is a biological phenomenon determined by DNA and the sex chromosomes. Gender is a social construct that a human being experiences as part of their role in society in the various ways that they experience themselves. That's from my son Dwyer. So in stories, this is, I think, fascinating. If you're starting to think metaphorically, and part of growth is to be able to see metaphor. A trauma response, when we feel threatened, we look at things as literal, as black and white, as kind of a fundamentalist perspective, versus a more spiritual and transcendent perspective, which is we can understand the beauty of myth, of metaphor, of story. So as we look at story and myth in our lives, you can think of story as classic movies, classic literature, wonderful, wonderful, enduring stories. When we think about those, the man and the woman in the story are often symbols of masculine and feminine, right? The man plays the role, and often in our storytelling, to embody the masculine traits that we're going to talk about this evening, and the woman, the feminine. But that's just a metaphor. Just like the way that we talk about death in stories is often a metaphor for letting go of some old ideas, some old beliefs, an old way of living, making way for the new life. So our strict associations. In fact, I've had people really with the sensitivity around gender these days. I've had people that are really resistant to the ideas of masculine and feminine because they can't separate them out from gender and sex. It's too tied. They hear implicit in the discussion the societal constraints that we place on the genders that we experience in other people. So let's talk about it. They are not interchangeable with gender or sex. I've covered that. They are not good or bad. That's another reason why I like talking about masculine and feminine, because they're just different energies. And we'll talk about how they do get embodied in parenting. Both energies have a bright side and a shadow side. Like all characteristics in human behavior, virtually, taken too far, it can be harmful and dangerous. But finding the right balance, it can be incredibly illuminating and helpful. Idealizing one over the other, and I'm going to talk about that tonight. Idealizing one over the other is a mistake. The masculine is not more important than the feminine, nor is the feminine more important than the masculine. And I would venture to say that most people, while they might agree with that on the surface, that's not their experience of it. Many people have a strong preference for one or the other. One doesn't need to vilify men to be a feminist, and one doesn't need to debase women to be for men's rights. You can embrace both. Men are shamed for showing too much of one or the other, but more for showing feminine traits. And women are shamed for showing too much of one or the other, but often more for showing more masculine traits. The goal is integration and wholeness and balance. And the strange things that happens with our children is, I've thought about this for decades now. In lieu of finding balance in ourselves, we try to control other people to experience balance. So what that would look like in my marriage with my wife is, instead of developing the sides of me, the masculine and the feminine in me more, I would try to coach and control and manipulate her to exhibit aspects of myself that are not fully developed and fully realized. So the goal, like all, is integration. Remember, in Evoke's attachment-based approach, the goal in therapy is to become your most authentic self. The self that was present before you started to take in the messages, which was right away, by the way. Before you were taking in the messages about what the family and your parents and society told you should be. And the key word being there, should. So integration and balance is an important aspect of it. In the journey, the work for the masculine, the journey is toward enlightenment. The hero that embodies the masculine often goes out to seek after the prize, right? They travel, they leave home. There's a very courageous energy to masculine, right? Confronting authority is masculine. Standing up to dragons and rescuing those in distress is a masculine, heroic kind of archetypal energy. It's an outside focus often. Often it is meeting tasks and doing difficult things. It's a masculine energy to return that phone call that you don't want to return, to have that conversation that you don't want to have, right? It's a type of energy in every human being, regardless of their gender. The defenses are maintained through control and power. So the darker side of it starts to look like a autocratic kind of approach, controlling approach, using power. Science and the discovery of the inner self is the lesson. Excuse me, silence. Learning to get quiet, learning to stand still. Oftentimes, the hero on the journey, the moment of awakening is the moment of failure and the moment of self-reflection. A lot of our heroic journeys are speaking to that masculine part of ourselves. And so you'll recognize that the hero doesn't often come back with the thing it went after. In fact, in a good hero's journey, they won't come back with the thing that went after, because the thing that they went after represents the way that they used to think about the world. It's like sending a child to our program and saying, I want to fix my child. That's a great starting point. But what happens for you, if you allow for it, is you, parents, become transformed. You have new eyes and new ears with which to hear, new skills, new thoughts about even basic behavior. And that shift in perspective, that transformation in the way of looking at the world, is that silence and that inner life awakening. And again, in the masculine journey, it's about courage, about facing the thing that scares us the most. In the feminine part of the journey, it's about life and its connectedness, right? It has a lot to do with what we think about when we think about the primary sexual functions of a male or a female sexual human being, right? It is about nurturing and welcoming, about receiving. Feminine energy is receiving, masculine energy is giving. It's often an internal and quieter focus. It's not grand. The feminine is very quiet. One of the things that I always talk about when I talk about the feminine, trying to help people see that we can develop all of those attributes, is that a good therapist is in large part a feminine energy. When I was younger, and a new therapist, I thought it was masculine. In fact, I thought it was masculine energy. And I remember one of my supervisors during graduate school saying to me, I thought he was giving me a compliment, but he was just describing me. In fact, in some ways, I think he was warning me about what was to come. He said, Brad, I see you in therapy as a warrior, because I wasn't afraid to say difficult things. I wasn't held back by that. I would take those risks. I would demonstrate the courage of the masculine, the warrior archetype. But as I've grown as a human being and a therapist and a father, what I've realized is I've really learned to embrace my femininity, my feminine energy, which is to listen, to hold space, to welcome, to nurture, to give somebody the experience of belonging, of feeling welcomed and accepted. The feminine defense looks like trying to control things with anger and withdrawal. And again, you can project these onto men and women in your life, and you can imagine them fitting. As we start to talk about the dark side of the feminine archetype and energy, we talk about moving beyond conformity, right? That the wound, the feminine wound, is to be the same, to have no separateness, to have no space. Looks anxious and afraid for separation. So the feminine journey is to move beyond conformity. And I think a lot of folks that are really drawn to the Evoke work are drawn to that feminine part of the journey, right? So much of what I talk about in my own feminine journey is learning to unlearn so much of what I told that I had to believe to fit in and belong in our culture, in this world, and learning to abandon will. I love this quote that I saw from a colleague this week who said that willpower, because I've always struggled with explaining will and surrender, like they talk about in 12 steps. And she said something, Molly Carmel said something. She said, remember that willpower is a limited resource. And then it hit me. It is. If it's just holding on tight and gripping tightly and demonstrating willpower at our most difficult, compromised, exhausted moments, we won't have any energy to do it. And so part of it feels like surrender, abandoning control, letting go. And both to become more whole, they must experience the other's region. That's a really important part of this. It's not about becoming, if you identify as male, if you identify as a he, that you embody all of the masculine, and it's not about, if you identify as a she, that you embody all of the feminine. It's finding balance inside with both, finding both strengths, and then of course moving beyond the specific context and the way that we grew up. Carl Jung described the animus as the unconscious masculine side of a woman. So for a woman, her masculine traits are referred to by Jung as the animus, and the anima is the unconscious feminine side of a man. And so learning to embrace, give voice, tune into that is a part of becoming balanced. A lot of times when I think about masculine parents that we work with, I'm trying to get them to listen, right? Trying to encourage and foster an ability to listen and sit with and understand and be compassionate and empathic. For those that are denying the masculine part of themselves, who haven't fully embraced, we're talking about setting a boundary, right? Saying, this is what I can and can't tolerate. This is my line in the sand. This is what I believe in. This is who I am. And I think for a long time, where I have made mistakes is I'm focusing on my masculine and feminine conflict and journey. I've emphasized for so long this idea of opening up space, because that's been me developing my feminine energy, my feminine side during my life, that it's almost as if I spoke over. And when I wrote the Audacity to Be You, that's why I started with that chapter and talked about this. I said, being a self, being who you are, is a given. And where that comes from is, for me, that wasn't the hard part as much. I was that warrior. I could stand up to the shoulds and the shouldn'ts and the dragons of the world. But what I had to learn to do was to develop the feminine side of myself, the listening, connected, empathic part. Recently, where this came from too is as I think about this, I was thinking about this and I did an experiment on social media. And I asked them if they could identify the following attributes. And I made the point, that we talk about toxic masculinity a lot. And I think we talk about healthy femininity a lot, but we don't talk about healthy masculinity and we don't talk about toxic femininity. In fact, I was just talking to somebody a long time ago when the idea of toxic femininity came up and they laughed it off like it wasn't important. Like that's not the problem in our society when it's just as damaging to our children, to our marriages as toxic masculinity. It's just less visible, less well understood. So I'll talk about where these things go. The feminine gifts are connection. I described this connection, empathy, nurturing, warmth, and belonging. And there are more, but it's that kind of energy. It's a grounded, safe, maternal, warm, strong, secure kind of energy. It's the place where the child can check in on and go out and explore the world from and carry that sense of safety with them wherever they go. It's the child that can come home during the holidays, the adult child, and feel welcomed and not come home for the holidays and be okay with that that's okay too. The wound that comes out of the feminine when the feminine is overdone, when its dark side and is alive, is intrusion. Toxic femininity is intrusion into other people, telling them the way they should live, how they should feel, right? It's violating the boundary of the other, not making space for an other, but violating when say to belong here, to be welcome, we all have to think and feel the same thing. And the outcome is that there's not really a self, not a separate sense of who one is. And, the reason why toxic femininity is so important is because so many parents that I've dealt with, in fact, the vast majority of parents that I've dealt with are committing these feminine mistakes. And it's driven by this tremendous fear and anxiety. It's driven from their own feminine wounds, where separateness is a threat, where going out is a threat. I'll talk more about that as we go. The masculine gifts are independence, self-efficacy, autonomy, and protection. The masculine wound is abandonment. So, in other words, when taken too far, the masculine, there's no connection at all. And the feeling that's left over, as in with the feminine, the feeling is no separate self, no identity. I don't know who I am. I can't get the voices out of my head that tell me what I should and shouldn't feel, think, do. The masculine is to feel unworthy of love. It looks narcissistic, right? It's trying to get attention, trying to show the world, trying to prove and hold on to this fragile idea that I'm lovable, worthy of love, worthy of that I have some value to add in this world. And that makes all the sense in the world, right? If one is abandoned as a child throughout childhood, it's not a one-time thing. It's an everyday thing, just as the intrusion is an everyday thing. If one is abandoned, one has this experience like, I must not be that interesting. There must be nothing of worth in me to keep the people that are supposed to be there for me and interested in me. There's nothing compelling about me. So then one goes through one's life trying to prove to everybody how great they are. So, a family therapist colleague said this to me just last week. And they said, I know that this is sloppy because it's referencing gender and sex, but I thought it was great because oftentimes males do overvalue the masculine parts of themselves and undervalue the feminine, and women often do overvalue the feminine and undervalue the masculine. It's not always true, but it tends to be true. And my colleague said to me, fathers tend to underparent and mothers tend to overparent. And I love that. I love that idea that, again, for mothers that have a co-parent that might not be parenting the same way and that you're in conflict with, part of this tonight's broadcast is to understand them. Understanding somebody changes you. That's really what we're trying to do with your child. We're trying to help you to understand them. We're trying to understand them. And something about it automatically changes you. I've told the story that my 5-year-old son, who's now 29, said to me while we were watching a Disney cartoon. He paused I think it was probably a DVD player. He paused the DVD player and he said, Captain Hook from Peter Pan, Captain Hook is not bad. He's sad, right, Dad? And I said, exactly. And then he just pressed play and we kept watching it. The minute you understand somebody, the minute you have compassion, you have a different reaction to them. Susan Sontag, a philosopher and author, wrote, what is most beautiful in virile men is something feminine. And what is most beautiful in feminine women is something masculine. And not only do I think it's beautiful prose that she wrote, but we can feel that. A lot of, I want to stay away from gender as much as possible because it's not synonymous with masculine and feminine, but if you'll allow for it, and none of you are sitting in the room disagreeing with me, you know, a lot of men will say when they're going through mental difficulties, I want her to be her own self. I want her to take care of herself. I want her to be secure in herself, to go out there and take risks and do things. And when she does that, there's a strong, compelling draw. And of course, I think it goes without saying, because it's so commonly said, that many women say, I just want him to be able to listen. I want him to empathize and not fix things, not go about being that masculine fixer, warrior archetype. I want him to be soft and nurturing. I want him to see me. I want him to see the children. Talk about a couple of lessons that I wanted to share this evening and how they can inform us in general. There's a book written in the early 1990s by Robert Bly called Iron John, and the title is based on a myth, an ancient myth, centuries old, that he used by the name of Iron John. And I won't tell the entire myth because it would take hours and hours. But part of the myth is they capture this hairy, this animalistic creature, and they trap it and they put it in a cage on the grounds of the castle, on the castle's grounds, and it stays there locked. And at one point, the young prince is playing with his favorite toy. Everything in this story has symbolism to it. And this little toy, one time when he's playing with it, falls to the ground and rolls inside of the cage where Iron John is being kept. So Iron John says to the little boy, he says, I'll give you your ball back if you give me the key to get out of here. And Iron John tells him, the key to this prison that I'm in is stored under the pillow of your mother. And you have to steal it from her. You can't tell them that you're letting me out. This has to be in secret. And the young prince goes and steals the key from underneath the mother's pillow and lets the creature, this beastly creature, out. The beastly creature puts the young prince on his shoulder and runs out into the forest. And he follows through with another promise he made, that he was going to teach them the ways of life in the forest. So the metaphor is this: that children, young boys, children, have to steal the key for freedom. There's some opposition. There's some breaking free. The key underneath the mother's pillow is placed there symbolically to represent the dreams that their mother has for who her boy is going to be growing up, or daughter is going to be growing up. Both parents, actually, what they think the child should be and the way that the world should be in their child's life. And the reason that he can't ask for the key and ask his parents, because they won't give it to him, and so he has to steal it. And so part of the struggle, it doesn't describe everything, but part of these are, hundreds and thousands of year old ideas. Part of the struggle is for the child to grow up, to learn what it means to be, in this case, a man. He has to betray his parents. He has to differentiate. He has to demand and require separateness, become oppositional. Robert Johnson, from his book entitled He, Understanding Masculine Psychology, wrote, "No son ever develops into manhood without, in some way, being disloyal to his mother." These are radical ideas to untrained clinicians. That quote is radical, especially reading it to at least the live audience that I speak to, are a group of parents. Primarily, my audience is mothers. It's probably about 65, 35, maybe more, mothers and women. To suggest that children need to be disloyal to their mother to become a man, that sounds like a radical idea, but that's the way that we think about human development, relationships, when we think about them through the idea of mythology. That's what these stories are telling us about. The runaway child, the disloyal child. I love this story, again, borrowing from Psyche and Eros and the Golden Fleece. Psyche was given several challenges. Again, long story, lots of depth, lots of dense metaphor. But Psyche was given 3 challenges by her mother-in-law, essentially Aphrodite, to win the back the hand she had lost because she violated some rule, to win back the hand of Eros, or Cupid, as he's also referred to win back his love. And one of the challenges, I believe it was the 3rd challenge, she was told that she had to gather golden fleece. So there were golden rams out in the pasture with golden fleece, and she had to gather a certain amount. And these golden fleece were fierce creatures. And at every challenge, interestingly enough, at every challenge that Psyche was presented with, she had a suicidal impulse. This can not only help you, but it can help you thinking about your children. The suicidal impulse, as we learn, is an instinct to get rid of all of ourselves because we feel like we're in an unwinnable situation. For Psyche, she wants Eros more than anything in the world, but she's going to die if she tries to go get the fleece off the rams in the field. They're too. One version of it says that the golden fleece is so hot in the sun that it'll burn her. There are other versions of it where it talk about these rams will run her over. This is the idea of confronting the masculine, confronting the authority. So just as she's contemplating suicide, the reeds that were growing near the river speak to her. And they tell her, you can do this. Don't go out there during the middle of the day and gather the fleece from off the rams. You'll die. You'll surely die. The reeds said to Psyche, wait until the sun goes down, and then go into the thicket where the rams have been and gather the fleece that has been left behind on the thorns as they walk through the thicket. And that should give you enough fleece to go back to Aphrodite with what she requires. And the idea, again, is about not confronting masculine energy, which is something we do. I'm seeing it a lot in our society. We meet the masculine head on. We punch the defense or the symptom in the nose. I'm tempted to tell my family, this is your problem. Or to tell a new client, you know what your problem is? It's this. Or to say to our son or our daughter or child, this is your issue. That's the confronting. And what this ancient story is trying to tell us is that doesn't work. Everybody suffers. Everybody dies in that version of things. So find a way to go around it. So when you're sitting listening to a child struggle, a partner struggle, a client struggle, you're listening more than you're talking. You're not judging. You're trying to understand their dilemma. Maybe even make the dilemma conscious, help it to rise to the surface, help them find out where they got the wound. That's really what we're doing in psychotherapy with your children. We're trying to help them understand, and you for that matter, maybe as important, maybe more important for you, understand where that symptom came from. What is it serving? What unconscious dilemma, wound, um, is it speaking to? And the mere understanding of it, going to the thicket, finding it where it was, find the fleece where the rams were, the more we can see the child, the more we are changed by that understanding. And in that change, we respond differently to them. That's why, you guys, when I talk about technique, it's not a technique. I gave feedback to an employee recently, and they said, "Oh, you got me. Sorry." It was in a clinical setting. I said, "It's not about sorry. That's not what I'm doing. I'm not trying to catch you. I want to understand why you did what you did, because that line of thinking, that's what heals people." That's why we changed the letter from the letter of accountability, which most programs still call that letter where the child kind of confesses what they've done so far. That's why we changed it years ago from the letter of accountability to the letter of awareness, because it's not about catching them. It's not about saying to them, "Here's what you did wrong. Let me tell you what to do right." It's about saying, "I want to understand why you did what you did. I want you to understand, really, why you did what you did." And so that shift changes everything. I know it sounds radical what I'm about to, it sounds heretical practically what I'm about to say. But psychology gives us a lens with which to see the world and our children and our loved ones that is compassionate and non-judgmental and practical. I don't want your children going out there, or you going out there stealing and hurting people and overdosing on drugs and cutting on yourself and abusing people's sex. I don't want that to happen, obviously. And the only way that most people know how to control for that is to say, "That's wrong, that's right." This stuff tonight is different. What I'm talking about tonight is, it doesn't work. It does work in the short term. It gives you some relief from the trauma, or the wound, or the fear, or the hurt, or the grief, or the sadness. Absolutely. I was in a clinical training a few weeks back. I think I've shared this, where we were talking about self-care, and one of the therapists says, "What if self-care is cocaine, for example?" And I said, "Well, if you were my client, I would say to you, I guess you can try that." I mean, my children in my home, that's not what I say. There are rules around it, and it's very practical. Here's the rules, here's the guidelines. Your brain is not fully developed. Under my watch, this is kind of how it's going to be. But it's not about it's bad or wrong. It's about it doesn't work. And your adolescent or child brain isn't equipped to figure that out and process that information right now. So I'm going to protect you from you. But the shift is from good and bad, because that's the way that human beings have learned to deal with the dilemma of being human, is put everything into a good and bad and right and wrong. And psychology offers a much, much more complex lens. Psychology says cocaine makes you feel alive, makes you feel empowered, makes you feel um, like you're great, grand, gives you delusions of grandeur, which for a lot of people who don't feel good would be a wonderful relief from that dark abyss that they're constantly feeling swallowed up by. And it also is addictive and ruins your brain and ruins relationships. It turns you into a monster, so to speak. Or alcohol or cutting. I would say to kids in the wilderness, in our wilderness program, I've said this since I was a young therapist. I would say, if doing drugs and stealing and yelling and being unkind helped you to have a meaningful life, I would teach you how to do it. I really would. You know, when children say to us, I never understood this. Today, it even breaks my heart more. But I've heard people criticize children, teenagers, young adults who say, "What's in it for me?" As if somehow they're merely asking of that makes them somehow selfish and unlovable. And I would say to my young clients or parents, I would say that to you. If you said, "What's in it for me? What's in it for me to believe this stuff you're talking about tonight?" I would say freedom and love. The freedom to be who you are, to love yourself, and to love everybody with much, much more capacity than you've ever experienced. That's the shift. And if you follow along just a little bit, you can start to hear it. That's why part of this work is listening to the podcasts, not because they're mine. I want to be clear about this. Nothing I wrote tonight originated with me. I've taken other people's information and synthesized it and put it into my words. This is not Brad Reedy's stuff. This is what the masters have taught since the beginning of the development of the field of psychology and psychotherapy. It's the way that we're built, the way that we work. I was just saying to my daughter, my adult daughter, just this weekend, I share with you, we have a lot of conversation. She's finishing her PhD in clinical psychology. And as we were talking about it, I said, Jamie, my therapist, years ago, 15, 17 years ago, used to say something to me about parenting. When I would bring a case before Jamie, she would say, well, that mother or that father needs the child to be the bad one because they don't want to be the bad one. So they need somewhere to put their inadequacies, their wrongness, their badness on somebody else. And it serves the parent. And I said to Jamie, that sounds weirdly symbolically interesting. And now I know it's true. When we don't own our own inadequacies, we make the child wrong. I was called melodramatic. In other words, I was called wrong. My mother did it with every unconscious intention, was to make me feel bad for my needs being expressed as vociferous as they were, because she felt overwhelmed and didn't know how to handle it, didn't have any tools to handle it. Instead of confronting and dealing with that, she made me the problem. I needed to change and fit within her bandwidth and her limited capacity for the problem to be solved. I wasn't the problem. I was a problem. I was my problem. Eventually, I became my problem. But I wasn't the problem in that equation. And when I blow up at my children, they're not the problem. I am. When I shame my children, I'm making them the problem so I don't have to look at myself. And it can be, it can be about setting boundaries. We don't like setting boundaries because we've been told that that we're selfish. We've been told that if we take care of ourselves, we won't be lovable. That's what our parents unconsciously taught us. And that sounds crazy, but it happened a lot to a lot of us. And so instead of setting a boundary, because it brings up every fear that we have, we talk about what a jerk the other person is being. You see how we take that feeling, that inadequacy, that lack of depth, that lack of work in our hearts, and we make other people the problem? What I'm saying to you, if you're new, I apologize, as I often do. It might sound woo-woo and new agey and like psychobabble. I know that. I've been where you are. It sounded like that to me even after I had a PhD, frankly. If you rewound the clock 20 years and I was listening to me talk in 2022, nothing I would say would make that much sense. I would be skeptical of it at best, dismissive of it most likely. I love one of the readings that we read at our intensives often is the Letters of Juliette. It's a companion to the Knight in Rusty Armor that was written by Robert Fisher, a classic masculine hero's journey story. And Jamie Gill, my therapist, wanted to write the feminine journey. So he turned it into a book about the wife who was left behind. And one of the things that she confronts in the third of 4 chapters, it consists of 4 letters that she writes, kind of journal journal letters that she writes to her husband as she goes through her journey. In the 3rd chapter, she's confronted in a dream by the great hall of women who are telling her that she should leave her husband, that she should not forsake them. And she said, for the first time in my life, I considered the possibility of leaving them and not you, my dear husband. And she eventually did leave the great hall, which was this pressure to conform, to fit into the club, right? The social clubs, the expectation. And I probably have no more common complaint that I've heard in my life than women telling me that the world expects them to look and be a certain way. It is for many, many of my clients in every context, marriage, parenting, just living their own life. It is a burden for women to carry. The call in this work is for balance, self-mastery, courage, and connection. But the journey is mostly an inward one. The struggling child or the failing marriage are how the call may sound, but the work is the same no matter the specific dilemma. If you came to me and you said, I want to know if I should divorce my husband or my wife, I would take that up as a question for us to explore. But I would eventually explain to you the work is the same whether you divorce them or you stay married. It's the same work. The outcome of whether or not you will choose to stay married and they will choose to stay married with you, that's a separate issue. You know, when a parent says to me, how many hours of screen time should I allow my child? Should I do a behavioral contract? Should I let my child come home? Should I let my young adult child smoke marijuana? Or should I tie my financial support of them at college to a clean drug test? All those kinds of questions. All those kinds of questions that are worthy of our attention and energy. But the deeper work is, who are you? What do you value? What do you need? How much capacity do you have? And can you expand that capacity some? Or is expanding that capacity self-abuse, denying what you need? And I can't answer all those questions, but I can guide you down that path of discovering them. So what decision you make with your child isn't the question. The question is, who are you? And out of that, who are you really? What's your authentic, real self? And out of the discovery of that, you will decide what your boundary is with your partner, with your child, with your boss, with your work, with your parents. That's the work. That's what all of the stories, all of the myths are trying to teach us. It's about becoming ourselves. It's about becoming who we are. And like Alan Watts suggested, is once we get rid of that fear of the dark side that we were told to fear, there's nothing to do but love. You might go to therapy, I wrote, to figure out whether or not your marriage is worth saving or whether or not you should send your child to a program. But the work is the same either way. It is interesting that your ex, I love this idea. I say this to people all the time. It's interesting when you tell me that your ex or your co-parent is a narcissist. That's interesting. But the real fascinating question is, why did you marry a narcissist? It's interesting to me that your spouse is an alcoholic or borderline personality disorder or bipolar. Those are all interesting. And I will listen and be curious and explore them. But the question for your life, the question that holds the keys to your happiness is, why did you marry that person? And so everybody who hates their spouse and ex-spouse, I'm not saying a lot of people do, but there's plenty. They would be wise to become an expert on themselves. Because divorcing a narcissist didn't fix anything. Not really. Divorcing an alcoholic doesn't fix anything. Those things are only part of the solution if the solution is you finding and nurturing and staying connected to who you are. So we don't tell you what to do, what you should do, but ideally, but we help you to heal your codependency, your attachment wounds, your repressed feminine side, your repressed masculine side. We help you to heal and integrate so you can make the decisions. And that's why when people say, well, Brad Reedy says this or Dr. Reedy says that I should do this or I should do that, you can be confident that that's not what I said. Because that's not how I talk. It's not even how I think. Just like I discovered for myself, the question that we are often stuck on, is not the right question. The question is never, what should I do? The question is, who am I? What's my relationship to my child or my spouse or whomever, where the dilemma lies? Who's my relationship to my child? And what's my relationship to their problems, to their issues? When I sort that out, those questions, who am I? What's my relationship to the person? What's my relationship to their struggles? Then I have the answer. And then what to do comes out of that automatically. And it's an expression of that. And yes, sometimes skills can guide us through the darkness, right? The I feel statement, the 8 tools that I wrote about, avoiding imperatives like should and have to and must and shouldn't and ought to. Avoid exaggerative language like always, never. Those can help you. But really, this is about integration and becoming who you are. And for all of us to become who we are, we would be well to foster healthy masculine and feminine traits and learn not to fear the dark parts. I'll tell you something that was interesting about that experiment. I don't know if I said this. I think I might have said it. But when I asked the question, every time somebody tried to describe healthy masculine traits, they were describing feminine traits. They'd not been taught what a healthy masculine. Imagine how the boys, and the fact that our prisons are full of 93% of our prisons are populated by men. 93% of prisoners in the United States are male. And we never talk about healthy masculinity. We don't even know what it is. We think it's having healthy femininity. And then vice versa. I did mention this. Nobody could identify the toxic femininity. They could identify healthy femininity. So we've got to, even with the very ideas themselves, we've erased half of us, each of us, from the equation. This work is about excavating yourself, who you are, what happened to you, how it dented you, the unconscious. This is Freud's idea, becoming aware of the unconscious obligations, the shoulds and shouldn'ts that you feel. And I was watching The Truman Show. I watched The Truman Show twice last week. I haven't seen it in 20 years, 23 years to be precise. And I watched it twice last week. And it's a metaphor for living one way and deciding there's something else out there. And to get there, I have to face my greatest fear. And it will feel like a metaphorical death. If you watch it, if you haven't watched it, it's an incredible hero's journey. Especially in light of what Jim Carrey is saying nowadays with his own life, dropping out of acting in Hollywood and criticizing Hollywood, right? It's actually the story that Jim Carrey is living today. And for those of you who don't know, it's the Truman Show stars Jim Carrey and was produced in 1998. But that's our lives. That's what we're being asked to do. That's what your child's dilemma is asking of you. Your child's mental health issues are asking you to get access to something that they need, that you weren't given from your background. All right. I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you for joining me. I hope that's helpful. It's a little bit abstract and theoretical, but I hope it's helpful. My books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, Learning to Love Your Horrible, Rotten Self, are available on Amazon and Audible. If you want to give back, Our charitable partners are Choose Mental Health. Go to choosementalhealth.org or sky'sthelimitfund.org or evokefamilyfoundation.org. We have support groups for current alumni wilderness families. So May 12th is our next one. And once a month, we have an alumni only meeting. May 24th is the meeting for alumni only of our wilderness program. We have intensives. The next intensive support group is tomorrow night, May 10th at 6 p.m. Contact intensives at evoketherapy.com for more information, or you can go to our website. If you want to do a deep dive into your own work and find out all these parts that I'm talking about, May 18th to 22nd, there's a spot left at our intensive. If there's a chance you can get it, grab it, because they really fill up during the summer. We've also put a young adult offering on the table. So there'll be a young adult intensive. I think that date is wrong. I think we rescheduled that, Malia, or maybe that's the right date. But go to our website or email intensives at evoketherapy.com. And then we also have an online offering. June 24th through 26th is our next offering. We have therapeutic coaches, life coaches, parent coaches that are trained in the attachment model. Contact coaching at evoketherapy.com. We have pursuit trips that are 3 to 30 days long for families or for young adults. Think Therapy Light. Anywhere in the world. We've done them on several continents. We will custom design them for you and your family. We ask all current families to attend 6 12-step support groups, any combination of Al-Anon, CODA, Families Anonymous, or adult children. You can also go to refugerecovery.org or NAMI.org, which stands for the National Alliance on Mental Illness. All of these broadcasts are available on your favorite podcast app or Spotify, or you can go to soundcloud.com on your computer and listen to any of these recordings the day after their broadcast. You can find Evoke and me, Brad, on Twitter and Instagram using the handles at Evoke Therapy and at Dr. Brad Reedy. You can also find the intensives on Instagram using the handle at Evoke Therapy Intensives. On Facebook, you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy Programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. And our Evoke Therapy blog has new content each week, so you can check it out there. My next broadcast will be next week, Wednesday, May 18th at 6:30 p.m. It'll be a Q&A, so family and friends, siblings, you can bring questions from them, about them, or you can even have them attend. We'd love to have them, provide them an opportunity to get to know the program and understand, get a little bit in sync with the work that you as a family are doing. So any questions left over from tonight or any topic you want me to speak on, I'll speak to that. You can always email at webinar@evoketherapy.com in between for questions, comments, and feedback. So write that down and keep track of that. Thank you for joining me. I hope this was a helpful point of contact. I hope you have a great week, and I'll talk to you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.